A very good evening to you. Many thanks for joining us here on GBC 24. It's always a pleasure to have you for company here on Moment tonight. My name is Abdul Hayi Moment, and tonight we'll take a look at financing the implementation of the SDGs. And I'm sure you know by now that the MDGs would come to an end officially in the year 2015. That was a year, and then now people are beginning to look at, so after agenda MDG, what next? And that is what appears to be changing to the SDGs. We'll get into all these details as we proceed with our program. But you also know that in July 2015, the Financing for Development, which is also known as the FFD conference, was held in Addis Ababa to discuss and explore the financing options available for the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, which are also known as the SDGs, that will shape the global priorities for economic, environmental, and social development to 2030. It is expected that the international public finance will play a crucial role in putting priorities into practice. But given its changing nature and the proliferation of new sources and mechanisms of development finance, how can it meet the challenges of our new era? These and many more are some of the questions I'll be putting to our guest who has joined us here in the studio. He is Mr. George Osei Bimpe. Mr. Osei Bimpe is the country director of Send Ghana, and I know that you know the work that Send Ghana has been doing in terms of development, and especially with this SDG issue. Thank you very much, Mr. Osei Bimpe. It's always a pleasure having you. This is the first time I'm having you on this platform, but on our other platforms you have been there, and it's always exciting listening to you. You know, it's interesting. I was having a discussion with one of my producers, and we're just trying to contextualize and define the word development. When we talk about development, from whose perspective are we talking about? So in all of this conversation, I know the emphasis is going to be on development. So without necessarily understanding what development is, we cannot move forward. So my first question is, what is development in the context that you have been talking about it all this while?
Okay, thank you very much. I'll try and make it a very simple way. So let us say that I find myself in a situation, and I think that the situation is not good for me. So I initiate a process to change my situation to a situation I will find comfortable. In other words, development is a process by which society, assesses itself to say that the condition within which we find ourselves is not good, because we do not have a dignified means of livelihood, especially in the context of Ghana, for which reason we need to make progression from the current state of affairs to an ideal situation whereby we see ourselves as enjoying the basic necessities of life. For me, this is development. Okay. So basically, it's not just about having skyscrapers everywhere. It is good to have infrastructure and everything, but as a human being, born, those of us who are religious, born in the created in the image of God, you are, you deserve to eat at least 3 times a day. You deserve not to struggle in terms of where to find a place to sleep. You deserve not to struggle with water, not to struggle with basically the basic necessities of our clothing and so on, health, education. So if you can access all of this and you have used it in a way that has changed your well-being, your circumstances, that is what development is. And so it is a process of change.
So again, and I'll go back to the same question. You refer to education, health, and so on. Education in whose context? The white man's education, the Western world's education, or the African's own traditional way of education? That's number one. And so when you remain with the African form of education, then it means you're not developing. again, if you look at health, we have herbal medicine and so on. And once you continue to depend on that, does that then suggest that you are not developed until you can't get to yourself that ultra modern health facility and so on and so forth?
No, no, that's not the case. Actually, like I said, development is change, process of change. So if you have African herbal medicine and you are able to develop it, so formerly people were brewing it in pot. We have to develop a system to determine the dosage. We have to develop a system to determine the best condition to brew it, to prepare it. We have to find a way of packaging it, storing it, to be able to find other means of adding even value. That in itself is development. Unfortunately, in our context, we do not see those as opportunities for change. But those things were not created, are not found in the environment for nothing. So our ability to use the resources within our environment and change it to change our circumstances in a way that doesn't put us in a deplorable state as we used to find ourselves. For me, that is a process of change. So, of course, no culture is static. We could be exposed to other cultural elements. Your ability to pick the good ones, use it in your own context in a way that allows you to build on what you already have in itself is a change. So for example, when you talk about education, it doesn't have to happen in a classroom. People are educated, but they have never been to classrooms, and that is because they know the subject for which they call themselves specialists, and they have gone through whether informal or formal system of education. That's it. And probably we didn't fashion out systems of developing indigenous knowledge. All the things that you call Western education or whatever you call it are systems of indigenous knowledge that somebody packaged for which became attractive to us. And so we didn't do ours. But of course, if we even have gone for that, how do we use that to change our circumstances? How do we use that experience and that knowledge, that skills to change our circumstances in a way that we can build on what we already know? That becomes development.
I'm aware that you were one of the development experts who went to Addis Ababa to have a conference which eventually came up with what you call the development framework. I'll be asking you about what that framework entails later on, but for now we also know that they say, and I am using the phrase they say very, very carefully, that Ghana is now a lower middle income country. Really?
Yeah. Yes. And
because when I work as a journalist and I go to the rural areas in Ghana, the northern part of this country and the northern part of the Volta region, I see stark poverty. And if you tell me these are people who are in the middle income brackets, I'm not an economist, but I tend to disagree.
Yeah, it doesn't actually mean that everybody is in the middle income bracket. When you use national statistics and national averages, this is the challenge that you have. So, in as much as we have made progress in increasing our GDP, it does not mean that we have consciously ensured that growth has translated into improving the lives of every Ghanaian. In other words, growth necessarily does not mean development. So one could achieve growth, but if there are no systems, programs to ensure that the benefits of growth accrue to almost every segment of society, the problem you have is increasing inequality. And you see that this growth in Ghana's economy could be attributed to 2 or 3 things. Few people benefiting. But then when you strike the national average and you say that per capita, in terms of per capita income, Ghana is then a lower middle income country. It doesn't mean that we have, all of us have the same kind of economic and social status, because that is not the reality. As we speak, majority of our people are still wallowing in poverty, just like you talked about it. In terms of development, there are spatial disparities between the north and the south. Within regions, there are regional disparities in terms of income statuses and so on and so forth. So a country could achieve growth, but it requires a well thought out program to ensure that the benefit of growth actually goes to everybody. If you do not do that, and that is the essence of implementing social intervention programs, so that you take care of the poor and provide them opportunity to acquire social capital with which they can compete with others. If you do not do that and you leave them behind and assume that because the economy has grown, for which reason you think that everybody is in the same bracket, you'll be deceiving yourself, and because the reality doesn't support those facts.
And maybe I have to jump and talk about the social intervention programs, because you have raised the matter. I've been reading some of the decisions you took when CSOs and other organizations met in Addis Ababa, and you have just talked about social intervention programs, but at that same forum you appeared, not you as a person, but I mean the generality appeared to speak against social intervention programs as well. But for example, the issue of subsidies, you came up strongly against it, and you wanted subsidies to be scrapped.
I am not so sure if that is the context, because so far as we are concerned, that was not the point we pushed. We were basically talking in terms of the global financial architecture that is not favorable for developing countries to mobilize resources. I think we can come back to that. But then, if for example, countries will be giving tax incentives to foreign businesses in a way that doesn't allow them to mobilize resources, how are they able to finance the development of their economies? Because we know that illicit financial flow is a major problem that developing countries are facing, because some of these multinationals conspire with whatever system that is there, that is weak, to siphon out capital. So capital flight is quite huge. Illicit financial flow is very huge. I mean, per some calculation, we are talking about $1 trillion in a year across all developing countries. In Africa, we are talking about huge sums of money that can develop the infrastructure of this the continent. And so the point we were making was that there is no need to subsidize foreign-based businesses to crowd out indigenous businesses. So that subsidy or that incentive must go to indigenous companies who have the incentive to stay in the country, to expand in the country, employ people, and have little incentive to take money out of the economy. So that is the context. And so the context is such that developing countries like Ghana should be able to mobilize a lot more resources. And before we can do that, we need a friendly global financial architecture that doesn't allow companies to misbehave the way that they have been misbehaving. And that is the call and the push that we made. Unfortunately, we could not succeed so much in getting a global tax body established for the purpose of regulating the conduct of business across all countries in the world. But at least we succeeded in getting an understanding that the UN tax system will continue to go under reform, to make sure that at least some of these concerns are taken on board, especially, for example, in 2019, when there is a follow-up conference to take stock over how far we have gone in terms of capacitating developing countries to mobilize more resources. So that is the context. Nobody is saying that. We will be the first people to say that social intervention is very, very important. Subsidy to farmers is very, very important. And if you follow the work of St. Ghana, for example, we have been advocating for that. Let me put a caveat, however. The way we deliver social intervention need a major overhaul. You don't just give social intervention to everybody. It doesn't make sense, because it is not targeting people who need it. What am I trying to say? If you give a blanket, for example, tax, fertilizer subsidy to everybody, smallholder farmer, subsistence farmer, medium scale farmer, and the large scale farmer, who is probably supported by some financial institutions, to crowd out the smallholder farmers who need to graduate from subsistence or the small holding that they have to medium, so that you use agriculture as a model of reducing poverty, as a model of building capital for private people. And if you don't do that, and you don't make sure that they are properly targeted, it doesn't make the effect of subsidy fully felt. For example, if you're also giving subsidy to secondary school, for example, and you give it to everybody, and I'm very happy that at least in the recently announced subsidy for SSS, we are only targeting community day schools. The assumption is that majority of them are for poor homes, which is true. And that is a good strategy to target people who need it. So subsidy in itself is not bad, but the way we deliver it is what makes it bad, so that at the end of the day you don't get the benefit. And it's about time that we began to think about how do we even link output to subsidy. In other words, imposition of standard. If government is giving you money to expand your business, just like in the case of Korea, the government of Korea at the time of industrialization was putting people in jail. Why? Because the government will give you business, money to establish business, and if you did not use the money and you went and bought yourself cars, or use it, drink, do whatever with it, and at the end of the day it didn't bring any benefit, the government was putting people to jail. This is something that we can learn, so that when government begins to support industries, there is a standard for you to meet. If you are not able to meet that, or if you are not able to find a positive correlation between output and the support that government gives you, you go to jail, or you pay back through whatever means that you find. If we begin to do that, then you will take out those people who have no business accessing such financial resource or support by government. That's the only way you really support genuine entrepreneurs, for them to begin to take control of the economy, make the kind of contribution that they do. So it's about the way we have designed our support systems, or the way we have designed subsidy programs. In itself, it is not bad. Right. And I will support a good subsidy program.
Later we'll talk about taxation and what role it plays in the whole picture. But again, I love this phrase you use, global financial architecture. I'm in love with it. But look, are you saying that currently the way the global financial architecture has been designed, it's making companies richer and the poor poorer?
Yes.
How?
Let me say, we have some companies in this country, and information I have taken on the ground is that these people do advanced tax planning. You know what? They have the capacity to even determine to us how much tax they will pay. So right from the word go, they don't know their outcomes, they don't know the amount of profit they have made, yet they have decided how much they will pay. If we had a very robust system to check some of these practices, we could easily find them out, charge them, and make them pay monies that we can use to develop this country. But because they are multinationals, they are able to attract the best of brains who can do all sorts of dubious stuff to hide the amount of money that they are supposed to pay. We also know, why do we have to, for example, give contract to another company to monitor telcos in this country? Because we know that the way they go about the calculation of their taxes is suspicious. Of course, I'm not ready to say
go into the details now. Yes,
going to details. So it's suspicious. So the fact that we don't even have the capacity to match their level of taxes in itself is a problem, because then it always put them ahead of us, for which reason they do not really benefit us. And so what we see, especially in the extractive sector, they take advantage of the tax holiday. After 5 years, they collapse, change their names, so metamorphose into something else. They come back to take advantage of that. These are some things that actually do not help the economy. Unless,
but when you go out every time asking investors to come and invest in your country, again, we need to create what we call the enabling environment for them to be able to come and settle. And so these are some of the ways and means that you use to attract them.
No, those are not enabling environment. An enabling environment is, for example, where there's respect for rule of law.
That's one aspect of it, sir. But the other aspect is that the person has come.
To live,
there must be a very good reason why people or companies are giving tax exemptions.
Yeah, there is a good reason, but what we have seen over the years is that those good reasons have been abused. That is it. Those good reasons have been, the genuine intention of government to attract businesses have been abused by some of these companies. Of course, I'm not saying all of them. So how do we begin to change the policy environment so that the dubious ones do not even come in the first place to take advantage of our system, take our money, and look at the pressure that the city is always undergoing? Because these people are the ones who are always buying what do you call it, dollar, and putting pressure on the dollar. So it is not the $100, the $200 that the two of us probably go and change that is always making the city weak. But these people always change because they want to take their money out. If they have any good intention, why would they want why would they not want to expand and probably build groups of companies? But they are always quick to make profit for their shareholders, for which reason they are always looking at means of softening up the little amount of the very few dollars that we have in the system. So it is good to have them. Of course, we should encourage that. At least we have a burgeoning army of graduates, and we need to find ways of absorbing them, into the job market. But it doesn't mean that those good intentions must be abused in a way that disfavor this country. And this is one of the things we need to address.
And that leads me to my next question, which has got to be with that development framework that you talk about. And you were at that conference where you called for a concerted effort by all development partners, as you put it, to ensure that the new development framework is underpinned by economic and social justice for all. This is not new.
Yeah.
Nkrumah had a 7-year development plan for Ghana. What new thing do you think that is entailed in this development framework that we haven't heard about before?
I guess you are talking about the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yes.
Well, it's just a global development framework that is supposed to guide, individual countries' development aspiration. Of course, it is not new, but at least it is a continuation of a process that was innovative, coming from the MDGs. The MDGs came as the first global development framework that was guiding, or at that time it was largely for developing countries, but the Sustainable Development Goals is for all countries of the world.
Okay, maybe we need to look at the story of the MDG program, for instance. How successful was it? What were the objectives?
Yeah.
How far did we go with those objectives? Then we can come to the SDGs.
I think that we could have done better. But here again, we don't also want to say that we didn't do well. At least out of the 4 goals, out of the 8 goals, we succeeded in doing so well in 4 of them. We couldn't achieve all of them. So the fact that at least for the first time in the history of Ghana, we had a global framework that was guiding our development effort in itself was good. The fact that we had set certain agenda that was in tandem with what the many developing countries were also aspiring to in itself is good. We could have done better, like I said, but there were a lot of challenges with that. At the time the NDGs were accepted, many developing countries thought that it was a UN agenda. For Ghana, for example, it took us 6 years, 2006, to produce a first assessment report. And so our own national level attempt to operationalizing the framework was it delayed a little bit. The difference here is that in the case of the MDGs, there weren't so much involvement of citizens, of CSOs, and even among key government institutions, awareness level was quite low. And so strategies for integrating it into national development framework did not happen until recently. So we have learned lessons from there. And coming out of that lesson, a lot of things have happened in terms of broadening consultation processes to make sure that community people, civil society, technocrats are part of the processes of agreeing on the 17 goals. Even within Ghana, a lot of consultations are going, have taken place, and more are going on to even decide on priority areas for Ghana. So unlike the MDGs, where all countries were supposed to work on the 8 goals, this one 17 goals, but countries have the flexibility to domesticate them, if I may use that word, to domesticate them and localize them, and to make sure that they choose goals that reflect their own development aspirations. That is the difference. The difference here again is that we have started discussions about how to finance the implementation of these goals. So right from the word goal, we are clear in terms of strategies to use to raise revenue, to mobilize it. Because in the context of Ghana, for example, we are now a lower middle income country, as you put it. That means that many sources that were hitherto available to us for mobilization of development financing are no longer available to us. We need to fall on a lot of private and public domestic resources to make sure that we mobilize enough to implement these things. These are the critical issues, and that is why earlier I had mentioned that some of these interventions cannot work unless we have a fairer global financial architecture that allows countries to mobilize more resources. How do you mobilize more resources if the tax regime is retrogressive? I mean regressive, I should say. We need progressive tax regime that allows the rich to be taxed more and the poor less. And that is the only way any advanced society would want to finance development, and that is a way to go for Ghana. But like I said,
is that not what the system is at the moment? That if you and I were to work together at GBC, and I earn more than you, definitely my tax will be higher than your tax.
It applies to say just a segment of the population. We know that a lot of people make more money than probably you make at GBC, yet they pay far less, or probably do not pay anything.
Is it because
yours is a former, yes, and we don't have a system of tracking transactions. $200,000. The next day somebody will come to your house and check where you get the money from, how you make the money, whether you have complied with your tax obligations. Do we have the system to be able to do that here? No. How would the people take it? Our own attitude of over politicization of issues will even prevent technocrats from executing their own mandate. All of these are issues that we need to, and I will call them systemic issues. And if you do not develop good systems that will allow people, technocrats at the GRA and all the key revenue institutions to go about their duty with that fear of favor, mobilizing resources will be a major challenge. And we just also have to find a way of blocking leakages or loopholes that people capitalize on to avoid tax, complying with their tax obligations.
You also talk about increasing international financial and technical cooperation for development. That sounds very technical.
Yes, technical, because already I have talked about the capacity issues. We need to develop the institutions that are supposed to help us mobilize resources for this country. How do we do that? Of course, some people are advanced. They have the technical competencies. How do we use international cooperation to leverage such competencies in a way that will help our own people to develop our people and to develop the very institutions that we have developed, we have put in place to ensure that resources are mobilized and used effectively. And so it is important that there is a way by which at the advanced countries work with those of us down here in the global south to ensure that at least capacities and strong institutions are built in a way that will allow people to even detect advanced tax planning, tax fraud, under invoicing, all the kind of practices that lead to a lot of leakages and avoidance of tax payment. And if you do not develop the institutions that are supposed to execute all this mandate, we will have all the laws, we have all the frameworks. At the end of the day, they will not be implemented simply because we do not have systems and procedures to mobilize resources at the domestic level.
And what does this new framework say about external debts?
External debt is one issue that the framework just talks about. How do we work with the development partners to make sure that we do not saddle developing countries with huge debt that makes it difficult, unsustainable debt. So yeah, it talks about that. It talks about how to reduce that. But that's where the contradiction comes in, because increasingly for lower middle income countries, at least, you are no longer entitled to some of the formal financing arrangements. You have to go to the capital market to raise your own resources. So that's why Ghana, for example, is going to IMF? No, Eurobond and all those things. Because at least that gives you the flexibility. Because if the IMF had given you 1.5 billion or 1 billion, the IMF would have asked you to do so many things. Probably the two of us would not be here. But if you went to the private market to raise that, you have the flexibility to use it the way you want it. But the question is, how do you use such money in a way that will build the capacity for a repayment? Oftentimes, that is where we go wrong in this country. We are so quick to go for such monies, but we are not so strategic in investing it in sectors that can allow us to pay, and so we have to go and borrow to pay back. These are things that we need to stop as soon as possible. And if we do not maintain that discipline and ensure that we are prudent in our investment decisions, and put those monies in sectors where the generative capacity is there for us to pay back, and make it a burden on other sectors or other initiatives, then it's better we don't even go for those loans, because then our debt becomes unsustainable, and it then even affects the rate of growth, because we cannot invest in critical sectors of the economy, i.e. provision of basic infrastructure. Does it also not depend
on what the money borrowed is used for? And so sometimes you don't expect to have immediate returns. Sometimes you need to be patient for a period of about 5 years or more in order to get back what you invested in.
I may be pretty young, but I haven't yet learned how a project has paid for itself in this country. Somebody can correct me. I'm not saying it has not happened, but I haven't come across any literature that says that this project, for example, if we borrowed money for GBC, GBC has been able to pay its debt. I haven't learned about that. It may be there. In other words, we have not been careful in even monitoring the activities of those. For example, if you constructed a road, say Kumasi Accra Road, how much money have you raised to pay for the loan that we collected?
There are toll booths spread across that road now.
How much money? Are we sure that we have paid for ourselves? Have we been able to block the leakages? No. So I am not so sure which road.
So what does this new document, this new framework, say about corruption as well? I don't remember seeing corruption come up even in your discussion.
No, it comes under systemic issues, addressing the issue of transparent and accountable governance. And so, of course, the word corruption is not mentioned, but if you can ensure a true, and I say that again, a true, accountable and transparent governance, that is how you begin to fight corruption.
Who is going to ensure that? Because if we all sit back and say
it is a responsibility of both government and citizens. Government on one hand has to push for supply-driven accountability mechanisms to be operationalized. Citizens have a duty to begin to hold duty bearers accountable for the use of their resources. So it doesn't have to, of course, if you leave it to government, you know, supply-driven motives will not really translate into, you know, tangible actions that will really make the citizens see that corruption is kept. No, because it serves their interest. They know that nobody is watching them. But if we can build a critical mass of citizens who are so informed about policies, programs, are so in tune with basic budgetary, what do you call it, like an analysis, and are able to ask critical questions and able to demand and able to cause change in terms of whoever is found to be, you know, misusing public resources, pressure can be brought up upon such people. The people are also becoming more patriotic in terms of not shielding wrongdoing. Many people see corrupt acts almost every now and then, but how many people are reporting corruption, for example? Hardly do we know that the single act of corruption can cost us, you know, access to basic services like healthcare, you know, education, water and sanitation. We don't really look at how all of these things affect us. So we need people to be aware and to be empowered in a way that accountability mechanisms, you know, can be taken advantage of. There are so many independent accountability institutions in this country. How often, I mean, how do people even know that they exist? How have they supported them in terms of those people who care to even report? If you don't have a system of feedback into citizens, even those who make the attempt to report do not see any tangible benefit from that. At the end of the day, they become enemies in their own communities, and people do not see why they should be reporting that teacher who took chalk to his house, or exercise book to his house, that DCE who has been using public resources the way he wants it.
Oh, that's CSO,
that takes money on behalf of citizens and doesn't account.
And so that's where the problem, I find most part of the problem to start from. Well, CSOs, many of you, and if you go to the northern part of the country, for instance, Tamale, I call it the headquarters of NGOs and CSOs. And then you speak to the people, and it's almost like you take advantage of their situations to make money for yourselves. And this is where the problem starts from. And if you, and I'm not referring to
I understand you perfectly. I understand you perfectly.
Transparency, we must see you to be transparent to start with.
I completely agree with you. Credibility is very, very important. So, for example, let me tell you what we do at SEND. We have something we call downward accountability, a way of opening ourselves up to the citizens. So, for example, whenever and wherever we have a community radio discussion, the first 15 minutes is devoted to telling the people how much money that project is costing, how much money we have taken for that project, pasting all those project information on our notice board and pasting them in our newsletter to say that come and ask us questions. So we are different. And increasingly, we see people who are also signing on to NGO accountability principles. Of course, it could be better. There are people there are others who are not doing it. And I would say that they can come and learn from us in terms of how we do it. Eventually, the natural selection process will work. Those who are credible, who have developed systems to open themselves up to accountability. So, in as much as they are pointing their hands on someone else, the rest will point at them. Those will stay in the business of, promoting development, building capacities. But those who are not will increasingly find themselves out of business, and no wonder many of such organizations are collapsing or have collapsed.
Yeah, but we have several coalitions of NGOs, NGOs in health and so on and so forth. And so when you are able to come out and point fingers at each other and say, look, that is a quack organization and that is a quack organization, and then you name and shame them, then we will develop trust for all of you. But you are advising the citizenry to expose corruption and so on. When you yourselves are not exposing each other,
I think the advice should also go, and we haven't limited it to only government. Just like I told you about our own internal mechanisms of promoting downward accountability or internal accountability. If any citizen finds somebody to be engaging in an act of corruption, in the same way that you report government, you can also report them, because at least it's an act of corruption. It's against the law of this country. So what prevents you from doing that? And that's the point I'm making, that we need a critical mass of people who are empowered enough, who really would want to go beyond what we are doing currently in terms of just talking about problems without providing practical solutions. And so to say that any act that you find to be contrary to the law, there are places and mechanisms for that you can take advantage of to report, and that is something that we would be glad to support. And so the course should not only go in terms of how we begin to hold government or duty bearers accountable. It is all of us, and that what we need to know is that the fact that we have closed our eyes to anything that we call petty, anything that we don't really see, is what gives birth to, you know, grand corruption in many places. So the attention should be on how do we begin to change the thinking of every Ghanaian, the attitude of every Ghanaian. And for me, one critical thing that, if I were a member of a government technical team, and since we are engaging them and they have been listening, I'm going to push to them, is that how do we have our own goal on attitudinal change? Oftentimes we talk about attitudinal change in this country as if it's given. No, attitudinal change has to start from the day a child is born. The way we teach, the kind of things we teach our children, the kind of things we teach our children at home. For example, if somebody came and looked for your mother would say, tell him I am not there. What are you teaching that child? You are teaching that child to lie. And that the subconscious of that child picks that, and that child doesn't see it as anything wrong. We need to begin to open people's mind in terms of how some of these conduct, attitude of ours affect the children in a way that when they grow, they only build on it. They only build on it because they have seen it as a normal thing, a normal trait. That is why when they are working in any organization, they will find ways of cutting corners. When they become ministers, they always find ways of enriching themselves. When they become whatever, when they become heads of NGOs, they will find ways of reaching themselves, because we do not have an orientation that make us, you know, to tell the truth. So we really need to take advantage of this and have a true national orientation, not the kind of campaigns that we undertake on radio to say no to corruption and that kind of thing. We really have to start from the root, at home, in churches, at the mosque, whatever social. How do we begin to change people's thinking? Why is it that people are no longer happy to even call themselves Ghanaians? They say it only when we are playing soccer. Why is that there's so much dejection in the faces of people? Because people don't seem to like the nation Ghana, the entity, because they think they are frustrated. Nationalism. What do we really have to show us that you are, apart from probably your passport?
We had a whole ministry in charge of national orientation, and so
you see, creating those ministries are good, but they are not good enough. To what extent their own programs were integrated into the upbringing of the children? No, they were just looking at ad hoc. No, so they're interested in having some small some conference and everybody goes away. For me, that is not strategic. We really need to work on, because all the systemic issues, people find nothing wrong if they run away from tax. People find nothing wrong if they report somebody who is running away from paying tax. People find nothing wrong if somebody is even driving on the shoulder of the road to destroy that road, because when you drive on the shoulder of the road, you put pressure there, you see that it starts degrading. People even don't have the conscience to say what you are doing is wrong. We need to have,
or even where you have the conscience to say it, others accuse you.
Others accuse you. They will say you are Chuno, you are that, and so that is why we need to work on, so that people would rather support you to ensure that the right thing is done.
You spoke about the SDGs, and you said that unlike the MDGs, these ones permit you to domesticate,
localize. Yeah.
Yes. I'm just thinking, to what extent can you domesticate? For instance, when we talk about child labor, there's a global definition for child labor, but in the Ghanaian context, when you look at children working on farms, for instance, you may not necessarily call it child labor, because this is a tradition handed over from generation to generation. But in the Western context, that may differ. I mean, so there are global definitions and global standards. How is it going to play out in all of this?
Maybe that's why you say localize. So if you localize, it means you are looking at your context.
But when you have, but when you have Western countries threatening Ghana in 2010 that we will not patronize cocoa from Ghana because you're engaging the services of children on cocoa farms.
I think that oftentimes, because we also do not provide information, and we also do not do some of this intellectual analysis, when they come here to do that kind of analysis, that is the information that they pass on to those who consume such analytical work. What prevents us from putting that issue into perspective with support from those who are into research? For example, I worked on my mother's cocoa farm, my father's cocoa farm, and that was how she was able to put me through secondary education. Was she exploiting me? No. And somebody has to do that. But then there are other circumstances where people also give their children out and they deny them access to education. So we need to see which of them fits a true description of child labor. In other words, if we refuse to provide a proper contextual analysis, that's the kind of conclusion that one comes to. But in terms of even localizing it, for me, it is even bigger than that. We have a decentralized system. How do we begin to say that in each district we will have a data management system to allow us to capture district level data to know how much progress we are making in the implementation of the SDGs, so that the implementation of the SDGs is looked at within the context of the district assembly system. So then, if we say we are making progress, it is not about national averages. It is about what is actually coming from a specific context. And that is, for me, what localization is about. Also giving the implementation responsibilities to the district assemblies, so that in terms of providing education, in terms of providing job, in terms of developing the local economies, we truly decentralize and give them the power, rather than what we are currently doing, to make sure that they have the capacity to raise resources and manage resources in a way that will lead to the attainment of the SDGs. For me, that is what localization of the MDGs is about. And it takes a lot more forms. And this is where we should go, especially if we are serious about deepening our decentralization system.
Mr. Wimper, unfortunately, we've run out of time. It's amazing when you're having such fruitful conversations, how time also runs against you. But before we go, I'd like us to look at, the MDGs. We're told 2015, which is this year, would mark the end, if so to speak. So now, post 2015, we're looking at SDGs. Is there a deadline?
Yeah.
When is it?
Next 15 minutes. Next 15 years. 2030.
2030.
We are looking at 2030.
And so we have some benchmarks.
Yes, we have some benchmark. And luckily for us, we have just started the process of developing a 40-year national development plan. And I say that we have every opportunity to have a clearly marked out benchmark for the next, at least for the first 15 years. And we have to anchor our national development framework on the SDGs. Of course, we are at liberty to add on. And already, some of the things that we talked about under the SDGs are already happening in terms of the GSDA 2. So it isn't that we are not doing anything. How do we harmonize it and have a more comprehensive and benchmark so that we know the progress markers and be able to follow through and make sure that this time around we don't miss out on any of the goals that we agreed on.
Interesting. We've run out of time, so we have to draw the curtains here. But my producers will certainly get in touch with you again. There's one thing that we have been thinking of speaking to SCOs and NGOs about, which is we want to look at over the years, maybe in the last 20 years or so, what has been the contribution of CSOs and NGOs to the development of Ghana, vis-a-vis to the development of the individuals who claim to be operating these NGOs and so on. Would it be available?
If you ask me. If you ask me.
So we'll be asking you very personal questions.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, it's a very topical issue, and yes, we want to explore that. Why not?
And we would like to thank you very much for accepting our invitation here. So when you finished with the latest conference, which was in July in Addis Ababa, as you left the conference grounds, what kind of impressions did you form, and how enthusiastic were you that we're going to see a difference?
Well, we were happy but not happy, because at least one of the key things that we were asking for, which we thought would help developing countries, didn't happen. But we were also happy because there was a general recognition of the fact that we need to establish a global tax body. For us, that is one key thing that we didn't get. But the recognition,
tax body, that we have the UN. What?
That's it. The UN doesn't have that bite, and that is what we want to create. Like a complete and a fully global tax body that will ensure that there's a fair global architecture, that as I've been talking about. But we are very optimistic in terms of having agreed on a framework that could, if we are serious about implementing the SDGs and making sure that we provide linkage and support institutions like the Ministry of Finance to bring out policies and programs and implement them, so that we are able to mobilize more resources to push the country's development agenda. That I'm very optimistic. We will see how we can all work together with government. We are all going to make sure that we monitor progress, engage government, provide independent assessment of the progress we are making in terms of mobilizing resources and also in terms of implementing the SDGs. This, for me, makes me a bit optimistic, but cautiously so, so that as a country will be, for the first time, we will take advantage of such a global framework and then take ourselves out of the kind of economic and social quagmire that we find ourselves in.
Thank you very much, and well, that's how we draw the curtains here on Moment Tonight. We've been speaking to Mr. George Osebimpe, who is the country director of Send Ghana, and we have been talking about financing the implementation of the SDGs. Send Ghana came because they are experts in development, and they have been working, I know specifically, one of the areas they've been working in is in the northern region. They have changed the lives of several people there. I'm aware of that, and I would like to thank you very much for the good job, first of all, Send Ghana is doing, and again for accepting our invitation here. We are grateful to you, but we will not forget to invite you again to talk about that contribution of NGOs to the development of the country. We'll see you again some other time. You have a very good night. Enjoy the rest of our programs, and have a very good night. This is Moment Tonight. My name is Moment. I am seated here by the grip side of Sergeant Ajete. You are teaching me English. Let's go back. Hey! Let's go back. We bring you the real stories.
Everybody in Ghana at the age of 18 has seen somebody naked before.
It's not all people who are infected with Ebola who show that bleeding tendencies.
It means that we have to share load, or else the system will collapse.
The real issues, the real talk.
I'm not haunted by the fear of failure. I'm always inspired by the challenge of success.
The leadership of the country believe in democracy.
Development also rides on the back of very strong institutions.
Topical issues of corruption and accountability.
Moment Tonight, from Monday to Friday, 8:15 p.m. to 9:15 p.m. on GBC 24.